director of Unit PITT. We share this space with the Now Society, and it's an absolute pleasure to be able to pay people to read weird things in this weird place. I would like to acknowledge, as we look out the windows and look around us, that we are on stolen land that belongs to the Musqueam, to the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and also adjacent to the Stolo Nation. And as we walk around here as well, to be mindful that there are many different ancestors. We are in Chinatown. Our existence here does displace other organizations with businesses, other legacy businesses. There used to be a travel shop here. I used to look at their mail often. That makes some ships. So just to be very mindful, there are a lot of ancestors walking among us as well. And then also, because I am relatively upset with the government right now, I think that it's also worth acknowledging that institutions like this, Unit PITT, other artist-run centers, accept grants from the government. We accept grants from the City of Vancouver, from British Columbia Arts Council, Canada Council. And it's important also to consider where these grants actually come from. And a lot of people think that it's just our taxpayer money, that somehow artists are paying for their own artist fees, but that's not actually always the case, that often they come from sin taxes, if you will. They come from liquor sales, they come from casinos. They also come from big industry projects like Coastal GasLink pipeline and all these evils that are happening, if you will. So I think that also to do a land acknowledgement in this place is to acknowledge RCMP militarized invasion of unceded land right now that's happening 16 hours north of us, to the Wet'suwet'en clans, and to acknowledge our complicity in that, and to be more open about discussing it, to be more open about acknowledging the hypocrisies of being in these spaces, of being comfortable in these spaces, of accepting money and thinking about where that money is coming from. So we're gonna have a nice time tonight, but also let's be mindful and gentle as we walk in this space, and direct our energies, our extra thoughts, if you will, to people up north tonight and at railway tracks as well. We do have a book. We have a lot of copies of a book, and I'd like to donate the proceeds of that to the Minnesota Legal Fund. So that is Rereading the Riot Act and On Vancouver 2011. And there's a lot of other books there as well. We're going to be making a donation of some sort at the end of the night. A little bit of housekeeping. So we have toilets. We have a toilet there. We have toilets also down through those doors and down the hallway as well. Make sure you grab a key at the front if you're going to use those. I don't think there's much more than that. Enjoy yourselves, and thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Britt, for that really timely introduction. Yeah, really happy to be here. Thank you, Casey, too, for organizing. It's really fun to read in Vancouver. I feel like, I don't know, I haven't read that many things in Vancouver, so it's a nice thing. I thought it might be fun to share sort of like the first half of a short story I've been working on. That's kind of like on pause for a while, but which I began in last spring while I was studying in Shanghai for a semester. And yeah, I thought it might be a nice thing to share. Casey and I met up for like a brief evening in Shanghai, and it was very funny and like and weird and like a very welcome. She was a very welcome visitor to my weird like sort of dorm room like self-imposed residency. And so yeah, this seems like an appropriate thing, and I haven't read it before. It's still without an ending, but it was a fun one to begin because I was studying Mandarin every day for like 30 hours a week or something at the university. And so the structure of this story is based on all the chapter titles from the language book that I was using at the time. So it has a certain, that flavor, but I was kind of using the structure of these chapter titles to write some kind of narrative into them. So this is like the first half of the story, and then I'll leave you hanging, and it's called Where Has Tian Fang Gone? Chapter 1. Where has Tian Fang gone? Tian Fang was just 16 when he went to the big city. He had a suitcase and was all alone, and he got on a bus one day that was blue with an orange stripe, or else it was orange with a green stripe, he can't remember, and after a couple of hours he got off the bus again and was a stranger in a place. The city was not at all how he expected. Instead of tall buildings, there were elevators with glass balls at the top that you could ride to if you had money. If you didn't have money, though, and most people did not, well, then you could just stay at the bottom and live under a tree, which is what he did from day 1 to day 20. He never told anyone back home where he was going, or that he was even planning to go. He just left. Many years later, decades even, he liked to imagine they might still be wondering. Had he married someone on the other side of the ocean? Had he been struck by lightning in a field? Had he committed some kind of crime, bought a motorcycle, and disappeared into the mountains? Where had Tian Fang gone? The truth is, though, that nobody wondered. In those days, nobody ever wondered where anyone else had gone, because it was obvious when somebody left that they had just gone to the big city. On day 21, Tian Fang got a job cutting hair at a salon at the university and moved into a bunk bed somewhere on campus. He cut hair there 12 hours a day, and for the remaining 12 hours, he could be found either eating noodles at the canteen, reading magazines in his bunk, or sleeping. He still doesn't know how he got that job, given that prior to that, he'd never even held an electric razor. Boss must have been in a good mood that day and decided to give a stranger a chance, he thought. People did that sometimes, he thought. Gave others a chance, he thought. The students whose hair he cut complained endlessly about their heavy course load, about the air pollution, about their lack of parental funds, about the smudges on their glasses and the greasiness of the food, about the trouble with people who came to the big city and did not speak the language. All the while, Tian Fang just nodded. He thought it strange that no one ever complained to him about all the haircuts he gave, even though he was quite sure they were very bad. Students, it seemed, cared a great deal about many things, but did not care too much about their hair. Chapter 2. I've been here for more than 2 months. On day 61, Tian Fang wrote a letter to the editor of a popular magazine. He'd spent a whole week's pay purchasing special edition summer issue 653 of something called Contemporary Hair he'd never read before but had heard good things about. And when it arrived, he could not have been more disappointed. Dear sir, he wrote, since he was quite certain the editor was a man, I feel compelled to write to you today to let you know how upset I am about the low quality of your magazine. I've been in the big city now for more than 2 months, and after everything I've seen and heard here, your magazine strikes me as quite old-fashioned. I don't know where your headquarters are, but have you considered relocating to the big city? To get a fresh perspective, if you know what I mean. The girls here are really pretty and not at all how you'd expect. Tian Fang wrote his return address of the university on the top left-hand corner of the envelope and posted his letter to Milan. Chapter 3. I came right after breakfast. Mary had loved Tian Fang from the very first moment they met. From the very first moment that she'd lowered herself into that squeaky salon chair and felt the swoosh of air over her lap as he came in with the plastic cape. When he fastened the cape around her neck, when he toggled the chair up and down, when he touched her temples to adjust the angle of her head. Oh! Mary felt as if her heart might burst. Mary had come to the big city just like everyone else. And just like everyone else, she'd been surprised to learn when she arrived that she would not be immediately invited to live in one of those big, shiny glass balls in the sky. Instead, Mary got a job cleaning the elevators up to them, a job she'd clearly disdained, but predictably endured. Her shift started at 5 in the morning after the messy clubbing crowd got home and ended around noon. She spent most of her time cleaning up vomit and cigarette butts from the elevator marble floor, unplugging the crunched beer cans from the air vents in the ceiling, and scrubbing the makeup stains off the walls. She often wondered what people had been up to in there the night before, but knew better than to ask. Mary took gravel each morning before her shift because the smell and the motion of the elevators made her sick. "What'll it be?" Tianfang asked, fluffing her hair. It was unclear whether or not he ever remembered her, though she'd been to the salon several times. He seemed uncharacteristically distracted today. He kept looking at the clock. "Just a little trim," she said shyly, "up the ends. Oh, and maybe a little on the bangs. Well, what do you think would look good? Do you think it would look good if I..." To her delight, Tianfang began snipping away at her hair before she'd even finished, the scissors flitting about her like mosquitoes, the annoying kind, but the kind you tolerate when you're in love. Mary just sat there, statue-like, blushing and submissive. After a whole shift worked in the elevators, it was often difficult to produce words. She widened her eyes in the mirror, screwing her features around into what she perceived to be her most flattering expression. Tianfang asked her casually what she'd been up to that day. "I came right after breakfast," Mary croaked, even though it was 1 in the afternoon. She'd just gotten off work and had eaten half a coconut bun on her way over. She didn't say this. "You must be a student," he said, looking once more at the clock. Mary looked at her reflection in the mirror. Well, she certainly would have liked to be a student. Yes, wouldn't that have been nice, she thought to herself. She certainly could not say to a person in the big city that she cleaned elevators for a living. "Actually, I live in a glass ball," she found herself saying, growing ever pinker as the words left her mouth. "Ha ha ha, yeah, me too." No, really, I live at the top of one of the elevators." Sure, Tianfang smiled. "I know you think I'm kidding, but I'm not," Mary persisted. "So then what's a girl like you doing getting your hair cut at the university?" he asked. "Well, hair grows back, doesn't it?" she replied. "Plus, the people here are really down to earth. A nice change when you're used to living in the sky." Tianfang smiled, and then he smiled some more. "You don't look like the glass ball type," he said. "No?" Mary took a dramatic breath. "That may be true, but I won the keys in a game of poker." Tianfang dropped his scissors and shuffled clumsily to pick them up. "What do you mean, a game of poker?" he said, his eyes narrowing and his voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. Their eyes met, and Mary blushed so hard she looked like a steamed crab. "Poker, you know, that thing with cards," she said coolly. "I know what poker is, but..." Tianfang looked genuinely stunned, like the puzzle pieces of some normally childish puzzle were suddenly being slotted together in a totally new configuration and making a distracting sound. The way he was holding the scissors now, gently and with both hands, made him look practically angelic, like a cupid stroking a precious bow and arrow. Mary looked at him with a tenderness that would have appeared quite sickening to someone on the outside. "You don't think I can play a good game of poker?" Mary asked, nonchalantly, flicking bits of hair off her nose. It's funny to me because I don't know anything about poker. Chapter 3.5, What You Say is Correct. If by now you are beginning to doubt the plausibility of this story or beginning to lose interest, what's important to understand is that none of this would ever have occurred had either party been properly from the big city. But because both Tianfang and Mary were from outside the city, and because it had always been a mystery for them, just how people got to the tops of things, Oh, and because they like to watch American heist movies. Oh, and because they still prefer to believe in a degree of goodwill in the universe that eventually put good people in the right place at the right time. Believing that all one ever had to do was, seize the opportunity when it arrived. Or that all anyone ever had to do to be rewarded for their hard work was simply to remain on one's toes should a door suddenly come flying open in their direction. Because since moving to the big city, they were always performing anyways, putting on stage makeup every morning, so to speak, and washing it off with nice-smelling chemicals in the evening, so to speak. Because the city already inspired in them all kinds of outlandish feats of make-believe that they inhabited every day and without hesitation, for fear of standing out from the crowd. Because of all of this and probably more, Mary's tall tale of living in a glass ball, worth many more quadruplets of zeros than she could add, suddenly seemed to them both perfectly and even disproportionately reasonable. Just as the explanation she'd given of winning said glass ball in a game of poker seemed to them both, on day 71 in the big city, like quite possibly the only way to explain how anyone got to the top of anything. And there was one place in the world where place in the world where individuals could go to be given a lucky break, it was in the big city. Chapter 4. I like your hair. But of course, Tianfang was in love with someone else. What kind of story would this be otherwise? And from day 29 to day 85, all Tianfang had thought was, if only he and the beautiful model from special edition Summer issue 653 of Contemporary Hair could meet one day and go riding the elevators up and down, well then the whole thing about moving to the big city at the tender age of 16, just to work for very poor money without any weekends or holidays, would be well worth it in the end, and he would be very grateful for having come. And because there was no doubt in his mind that the model he loved did live in the big city, this was where all the models lived, wasn't it? Life remained in this sometimes brutal place, if only for the slim possibility of one day meeting worth living. Chapter 5. Your name's great. Tianfang blasted Mary with the blow dryer and chattered excitedly to her about his fantasy elevator date with the woman from the centerfold of Contemporary Hair. What a spectacular view of the big city they would have up there, if ever he could find her in a city as big as theirs. What was it like living at the top of one of those beautiful elevators, he wanted to know. Did she have a gym in her building? Did she have a pool? Could she watch the sun setting every day from her couch, from her bed? What kinds of things did she keep in her fridge? And did she go to the supermarket herself to do the shopping, or did she order things on Wai-Mai? Did she have a personal assistant? Mary had long stopped listening. She was too busy staring out the window, a feeling of heartbreak invisibly filling her up like a solid-colored water bottle under a running tap. The feeling started in the hollows of her feet and moved up her legs, filling the cavern of her torso, becoming fuller and fuller. Finally, the water level reached her neck and threatened to flow over. What's your name again? Tianfang finally asked as Mary screwed the lid onto her metaphorical water bottle, just tight enough to prevent emotional seepage, but loose enough to produce human sound. Mary, she croaked. My name is Mary. Tianfang retrieved a little brush from the counter and dusted her off. That's a great name, Mary, he said as she thanked him coldly and went to the counter to pay her bill. Chapter 5. Mary cried. Mary went directly from the salon with her bad haircut and heartbreak to her patch of grass under a tree, where she promptly started to cry. She cried there for 3 days under the protection of a very large leaf, and on the third day she removed the leaf from her face and stubbornly went out into the world. Things appeared brighter out there than they had been before. This happens sometimes when you squeeze your eyes closed for a long time and then suddenly expose them to light. When Mary finally showed up for work again on the third day with her mop bucket and rubber gloves, she was quite sure she would be fired. But because it was 5 a.m. when she arrived, and there was at that hour no one around to fire her, Mary simply went about her usual cleaning routine and never heard a thing about it. Someone had roped off one of the elevators full of vomit to keep it from being used, while in the other elevators, the beer cans had merely been kicked out into the lobby to make room for the riders. This seemed to Mary like a strangely minimal solution, considering the severity of the mess, never mind the stench. How long might this have gone on, she wondered, had she chosen never to return? Would the people of the big city simply allow their city to decline into a permanent wasteland? Chapter 6. Shit, why didn't Tianfang think to get her number? Mary had said that she would call him, but that was just about the oldest trick in the big city book, wasn't it? And now it was just about day 101, and he was starting to get the impression that she had no real intention of calling. Another problem? Winter was now upon them, and the city no longer resembled the city of opportunity that he had first come to inhabit. The snow that lay over the big city transformed it from a lively, vibrant place into an oppressively gray one. The white stuff covered up all the things about it that he had liked best. The food stalls, the bicycles, the girls in miniskirts. Now all the people of the big city were bundled up in the most distasteful fashions. Toques and scarves and heavy-soled boots, puffer coats in black or red or purple, but black, yeah, mostly black, that went from the tops of their heads all the way to the ground. The people of the big city now resembled a factory of drying sausages, all bunched up and linked together with elastic bands at bus stations, subway stations, and around the entrances to escalators. Within a matter of weeks, the merely gray had transformed into a hopeless gray sludge. And the worst part about it all was that Tianfang recognized this sludge instantly. It reminded him of his hometown. Tianfang finished his shift at the salon and went around to the back of the building, where there were a few rusty lawn chairs, a rusty picnic table, and a rusty bucket, all spread out in a little half circle in the parking lot. Tianfang made himself a fire in the bucket and sat down in the nearest chair. It was negative 20-something out, but the heater in his room had been broken for weeks. He pulled his full-body puffer jacket tight around his chest and procured a couple of packages of shrimp crackers from his pocket. He chomped loudly on the crackers while he thought about his future, not fully despairing his current situation, but not exactly happy about it either. A stray cat bobbed out of the bushes to his side and meowed. Tianfang's options were limited, you see. If he quit his job at the salon, he could look for other work in the big city, but he might not find it. If he did find something, and even if he didn't, he'd have to give up his bunk at the university and go back to living under a tree. This prospect wouldn't have bothered him so much had it been the middle of summer, but as we've established, it was not the middle of summer anymore. If then Tianfang returned to his hometown, he would be physically well, but spiritually miserable. And worse, people would ask him where he'd been. Then he'd have to make up some elaborate story about his adventures in the big city, and some equally elaborate story about his reasons for leaving it. Oh, the troubles he had, Tianfang thought, as he chomped on shrimp crackers in the 20-below glow of a fire in a rusty bucket. Several stories up in a neighboring building, someone with a towel on their head opened a window and spat into the air. "Would whoever's down there please keep it down," they hissed, before slamming the window closed again. Boy, shrimp crackers sure were crunchy, Tianfang thought as he popped the last one in his mouth and chomped loudly. It's getting too long, but maybe I'll read the last chapter. Chapter 7, I Like Your Hair, Part 2. Meanwhile, while Tianfang was busy chomping on shrimp crackers, Mary was busy cleaning the vomit off the elevator floor as usual, when one morning, let's say it might have been around 6:30, a very intoxicated woman came in and pushed the penthouse button. Mary was down on her hands and knees at the time, meaning she was practically invisible, scrubbing the floor with a ratty old sponge, and this woman was really giving it to someone on the telephone. The woman was wearing a slinky sequined dress, her bare legs slotted into pointy black wedges and smelled of almond oil. She pivoted them around the granite floor as she spoke. Yeah, I know I told you that I would be around next month for a shoot, but plans have changed, okay? Yeah, I realize it's a breach of the quote-unquote contract we quote-unquote signed or whatever, but like I already said, something's come up and I won't be able to do it. Sure, a penalty. Yeah, like I said, it's whatever. Jesus, Glenn, you really are a nightmare to work with. You know that? Just like everyone warned me. Oh, yeah, well, I wasn't going to go there, but fuck you too. I never liked your style. Oh, please, you have a nice life. The woman hung up her call and threw her phone into a gaping opening in her purse. Some people really have no manners, she said. Mary stood up from the floor and started scrubbing the grimy elevator buttons. The elevator continued its ascent. 13, 16, 24, 28. I decided to go to Mallorca next month to detoxify my body, and this is the way I get treated for doing what is obviously a positive thing, she said. Mary inspected the woman reflected in the glass. She was pretty, but frail. She did have really good hair, long, black, shiny. It shimmered in the pink light of the rising sun. 80, 85, 90. They arrived at the 130th floor, the penthouse, and the woman with the good hair got out. Peace, she said, possibly to Mary, but more likely to the pocket of air in which Mary stood. To be continued.
And yeah, it's like has to do with personal documents, like not it's characters' personal documents and like letters between other characters and like the intimacy that's involved with that. So I'll start now. Dream circuit, cycle or lime sorbet with mint tea. The oil that accumulated at the bottom of my fridge, it was bright and orange in hue and could have been described as neon juice. I once was staying at a friend's apartment in a place I'd never been before. The bush I passed by every day was always dancing, hitting the side of the building. It would never stop making noise. A lot of families lived in the neighborhood, so in the daytime it was difficult to go anywhere without smiling at the children. My friend lived in an apartment close to a small mountain that people from all the world would hike up and to look at the city and watch the sky, sometimes to propose marriage. I tried visiting the mountain every day and found that in traversing it, especially in its wooded areas, was a good space to think about everything. There was a nice view at the top, but I found it difficult to enter anything there. The first nightmares I had revolved around a giant squid. My sister and I used to have a picture book of deep sea animals when we were children, and I had to close the door to our closet when we slept because I thought one would swim out of it in the night. I used to keep a dream journal throughout most of my adolescence, which is how I remember a lot of these things. I tended to have a lot of dreams about landscapes like mountains and their physical relationships to the sun and the sky. Passing letter 1. There's a bench on a hill that I like to sit on most mornings, but today it's raining, so I write this in the clouded light by the window, worrying about my eyesight. I'd like for this opening passage to act as some sort of transitional space or palette cleanser, like lime sorbet with a mint tea, between your colorful world and the one in the following sections. It's my first time writing like this in many years, so bear with me. I've been making an effort to see all the young people in my life recently. I visited my niece's house last month. She inherited it from her mother, who used to go by just J. Her daughter's name was S, and her house was fairly nice. It sat next to a freshwater lake and was in the northern country, where it snows for half of the year. As we stood outside gazing into the dark forest, she offered to sell the house to me for a quarter of the market value. I looked away towards the lake as a bird fell out of the sky and plunged into the water. I explained that this may be the last time we see each other for a long time, and she didn't really understand. We ate her favorite meal and had tea. Afterwards, she told me about a chest full of papers that she found buried in the garden. They were mostly archives of her mother's correspondences with friends, but on the bottom was something very special. Many years ago, her mother, who never expressed much interest in literature or writing, wrote a novel. We spent the next few days together reading from the chest, taking turns with interpretations and translations. When we got tired, S would go for a swim in the lake, and I would walk through the forest. When saying our last goodbye, S insisted that I take the chest and keep it buried in my own garden, specifically underneath my dead rose bush. She looked towards the forest and then to the lake and told me that these are her last days in the northern country too, as she was planning on selling the property and moving to the city. So, dear reader, as a parting gift, I would like to show you the remaining fragments of Jay's novel, as well as some correspondences for context. I would also like to apologize for this melodramatic prose, but please bear with me as these will surely be my last words before my hands turn to dust. Thank you for your patience. Outside, underneath this endless rainfall, is the most beautiful world. As my body begins to crumble and my winter nears its end, I often find myself staring into the rooms of my home as if searching for something I know will never return. Perhaps my eyesight is playing tricks again, but it seems as though every surface of my home has become reflective. My distant memories have grown ever-present and piercing, often to the point of physical pain, and the rain hasn't stopped for a really long time. Like an old lantern above an empty table, my heart swings in the cold wind from the open window. As the lantern fades and the blinds begin to let in the streetlight, a haze of memory once again fills my home, now accompanied by streaks of white floating through the air. Everybody finished eating, and now they're outside, smoking under their umbrellas and talking to themselves, talking about falling asleep while swimming to the small island in the center of that lake. Sadly, I never learned to swim, and it feels as though my generation has been left on the shore as an audience for this new kind of swimming movement. I think about my place on the shore and in the lake. I'd like to try and swim, but I worry. Would you rescue me, reader, if I were to sink? The island is filling and the sun is rising. The rivers of memory that flow through my heart freeze in an instant as 10,000 swimmers glide through the water in front of me. Dear floater, as I write to you this evening, I look towards the stagnant puddle resting inside of a wheelbarrow in my backyard. In the years I've lived in this home, not one moment has been spent tending to the overgrown garden that is only steps from my back door. I think about this often, my inability to come close to the garden, usually after asking myself things like, why am I so particular about the way I place my words when I write to somebody I love? Or, why sometimes late in the evening when my eyes have to be held shut, as if patching a leak in the hull of an old boat? Or, why am I so careful when I cook? I'm frying an egg as I look out of the window at a cat sleeping in the grass in the shadow of my neighbor's house. Can you see me from up there? I'm waving at you. I'm waving at you as I stand next to my garden. I'm writing to tell you that I've been working on a story. It's in the form of a script or a play, but I'm not sure if it's either, as the format I use is kind of my own, although I think you'll enjoy it. It includes a letter for you too. A lot of it has to do with what happened many, many years ago, but I made some theatrical changes, as well as included some pieces of writing I found helpful in articulating my specific emotions and spaces. Anyways, I'll include some of it in my next letter. I hope you are well. Perhaps we'll see each other again soon. Remember that you will always be above my head, floating like a planet. Jay. There's actually 4, I just remembered. Descending a mountain at dusk, Jay takes a moment to rest. She's been traveling for some time, 2 days, to deliver a parcel of money to her friend in the Southern Valley. When the second sun fell, Jay moved her life to the open steppes of the northern country in hopes of being closer to the vast landscapes her mother would always reminisce about. It was during the depleting days of the Old Sun era when her mother began reading poems to her as she would fall asleep, often lit by the single lamplight next to her bedside that had to increasingly be kept on throughout the fading days. It was around this time, maybe a little later, when it was common for her to find her grandfather, who they lived with, wandering through the fields on their farm, head facing the blackened sky and tears streaming down the side of his face. Late at night, when Jay was asleep, he would usually come back inside, sometimes panting so loudly that it would wake her up. Her grandfather was the nicest man she'd ever met, and he was like an angel. He believed it would be healing, the act of crying to the sky while mourning his recently deceased wife, for his soul and those around him. A bird's song is audible in the distance. The mountainside glistens as the sun becomes orange during its descent. A soft wind lifts some dust from the ground. Jay sits for quite some time and drifts in her thoughts and through her heart, eventually falling asleep from exhaustion. In her dreams, she's reminded of one of her mother's favorite poems by Meng Hao Jian. She whispers as she tries to remember, "South go the wild geese, for the leaves are now falling, and the water is cold with a wind from the north. I remember my home, but the Zhang River's curves are walled by the clouds of this southern country. I go forward, I weep till my tears are spent. I see a sail in the distant sky. Where is the ferry? Will somebody tell me? It's growing rough and it's growing dark." Passing letter 2. Dear floater, there is a rotten smell in the air this evening. It clouds itself around my head, and I can feel it inside of my eyes like a thin veil of gray, growing from the top of my spine and wrapping its hands over my face. I find it hard to breathe. My heart seems to have retracted itself deeper into the cave of my soul, and I think it doesn't like the smell either. Today, I had my favorite drink, salty lemonade soda, and walked along the floating river to the tree that makes me cry. I saw your reflection in the silver wings of a passing plane. You stood in a doorway, so I stayed outside. Remember when our worlds became three, when things were no longer in circles but spirals? Do you remember when the sun passed over us? In the face of death, I've frozen. I tried dipping my cold feet in the river, but instead I just ran home and turned off the light. Will you teach me how to float like you do, like a silver airplane above the open sky? The nations of this world have begun sustaining themselves by using pieces of the failed atmosphere system to lessen the strength of the sun, turning it red and evoking a paralyzing melancholia in everyone still living. I wish for everything in this world to be blue. Like I said just now, I've become frozen in the face of death. I froze the moment I looked up at you, falling towards our planet. I passed through the orchards of consequence, each tree bearing the fruits of every memory in my life. I still walk through there. I'm here now. Time seems to have been lost, but perhaps it is no longer, for what use is time in a field of memory? When I eat the fruit, I disappear from the orchard and my heart breaks once again. But slowly, I fade back into my walk, under the leaves and without the sun or the sky. Things are so cyclical here. I'm freezing. If the fruits of my memory have begun to rot, how will I ever walk to the end? I've arranged for this letter to be delivered at the base of your tree, the one I like to look at. You know it. A glowing comet lights up the sky when I close my eyes. When I reach the end of the orchard, I will finally learn to face death and live in harmony. Floater, you are forever the central axis of my heart, keeping me from fading into this rotting world. I will hold your hand. Jade.
I'm going to read 3 poems. I took the poetry part really seriously, and yes, like this. But the first one is a really, actually, like this one's published, and then these 2 are really new. The last one I was finishing before you guys got here, so we'll see how good it is. Okay, so the first one, if there's any people who've been to the Banff Center prior to 2017, you might know what this poem's about, but there used to be this very specific niche group of people maybe, but there used to be this really beautiful terracotta archway that was kind of like colloquially known as the feminist archway. I see you're you know. It was really beautiful. It had, but you'll learn about it in this poem if you haven't seen it. So it's called "I'm Sorry I Didn't Call," a letter for Sharon Moody. In the days when she stood here, she was bathed in golden hour dappled light, from fluttering shadows of swaying pines, coniferous limbs dancing into an ever-exuberant setting sun. She stood beneath full moons and disappeared in the murky fog of forest fire smoke. She was cloaked in blankets of snow for many blizzarding winters. And again, and again, and again, she was revealed by the melting of spring. But now the only remnants are faded, fraudulent rocks, camouflaged in a mesh of grass and gravel, scattered amongst complementing severed shards, detached from their binding collage, like boulders balanced between glacial currents, no longer a part of the mountain that once held them, no longer so rigid with identifiable edges, no longer holding the purpose they once held. She weathered many tenuous storms, resting upon a terrain of severe extremes. While she stood here, she held her space without the support structures bestowed to those around her, without the didactic, without the curatorial context, without the records of maintenance in the addendum of condition reports. So slowly and subtly she relinquished from her pebble bed foundation until her precariously ephemeral lifespan abruptly concluded. All that stands here now is impermanence, as a question to the relevance of permanence permeates this site. A binary begins to form, to segregate the alumni that remember her from the new residents that may never know she was here. For me, she became a marker for a moment in time recorded by a field of memory, a metaphor for the political capacities of resisting from the outside, a visual critique poignantly critical of the continuation of systemic inequities, an overtly feminine passageway that lasted only long enough to embrace some of us. She was once embossed with Venus of Willendorf replicas and Barbie busts, and inscribed with text-based sentiments like punk junk and curt curses like fuckface, slotted amongst ceramics ascribed with concerns like sentimentality is a superstructure covering brutality, or hierarchy is just their control device against free spirits. You must trust me as I attempt to describe her aesthetic appeal, as she is not Googleable now, just as she was not commissionable then. I suppose that for some she lost her luster after 29 years of remaining as a mosaic, a memento, a site marker, a signal of resistance, until finally she was but a resignation. She was a visual balance of rhythmic chaos, in complement to the complexities of ever-evolving theories relational to feminism. Recorded in recent archives are documents depicting her final celebration. Under the moon and amongst many friends, she was gazed upon and rested on as they gathered together to sit on blankets. They talked of gossip and then of art, with the origins of their quest to share in a love for the poetic, to sit with her and wait in these moments of finality, to praise her for her long-standing commitments to feminism, to learn she had a name we never knew and never used. Colloquially, she was known as the Feminist Arch, but her truest name was, I don't want a massage, I want a miracle. In thinking of this naming, I lust for an era that desires considered consent, one that is mindfully cognizant of the overt consolation in offering touch over tangential change. I too await this forlorn miracle as I fend off mediocre offers of suggestive caress commonly exchanged in the prowl of power. I sit where you once were, in an area now sanctioned off for construction supplies. I begin plucking from the earth what remains, assembling a constellation of ceramics in my palm, a faded yellow, a brushstroke orange, a swirling lilac, a black wave jutting into a sunset pink, an oscillation of sage and evergreen. I think of this modest forged collection finding its way into a new arch, an arch with varying intersections, an arch built by the hands of many, an arch depicting the temporality of listening, an arch that resists the monumental. What I want is a miracle, but what I've got is a mirage. So that's that one. The second poem I wrote just recently, like last month, and it's a poem for my oldest friendship. So I'll leave you with that. This friend is now like a fancy chef person. So I made they made a joke about not understanding poetry, and then I told them that saying you don't understand poetry is like somebody going to a restaurant and saying, I don't eat seafood. And so I titled the poem, I Don't Eat Seafood. So here it is. I want to know all the things you have learned to love, and I want to know all the ways, and I want you to know all the ways I carry you with me. There is a remnants to your ambience. I'm not speaking of nostalgia, but of something else that has yet to be defined. There's too many limitations within the guards of communicative language. But for me, it's safe to say you are a sanctuary of restorative calmness. and for you I am endlessly indebted. Never have you even been subtly suggestive of the weight of my burdens, to which you help carry, and so the trust we've fostered is now innate. I tend to ask too many questions in new relations, attempting an understanding of how others acquire love, or how others navigate articulations of accomplishment. But with you, I ease into a stillness of silence, reading your body's language as you read the reactions caught in my gaze. Assumptions with you are not dangerous, but rather accurate. You serve me sardines and order me anchovies. You remind me to apply sunblock. You wander me through the gallery. You critique the faults in my humbleness. You protect me in a way that I cannot manage to refute. You lead me round the back where the chain link breaks into a gash. You pound on the metal door, encasing an enticing thunder of echoing rhythms. It is somewhere between here and nowhere that I lose the bind of a mind rattled by the infection of trauma. Knees scrunched on a dusty concrete floor, I slide into a bliss, one that's been long foreign, one that's been extinguished by a nauseating delirium of grief, like the first rain after the scorching of a firestorm, pulling the ash from the plumes of smolder back down to the drought-ridden earth, dissipating the soothing colors of a diluted setting sky. I take your hand in mine and muster the courage to be forthright. I tell you that again you have saved my life, before as a boy with little knowledge of how to do so, and now with all the knowledges gained from the radical disposition of the gentlest man. I tend to tread too lightly, tiptoeing across creaking floorboards, attempting to be unnoticeable. You tend to exude an air of confidence, assuming you already know all the things you wish to fawn over. You claim no affections for the poetic, but I witness in you many multitudes of poeticism. In a crab claw fork for which you've doned a new purpose, in your melding of melancholic beats and bass-heavy drums, in your poignant self-criticisms pertaining to toxicity, in your aesthetic of color coordination, a man in constant admiration of, well, I say colloquial a lot. That's not part of the poem, sorry, just noticing that. A man in constant admiration of colloquial expressions should be a man with the patience for poetry. I stop you in your phrases to inquire for clarity. You say kick it and send it. Bogan and mate, clutch and all right. My braids are now plaits. You left the place I escaped, a place with mild climates and impoverished politics, a prairie grassland pillaged for its resources, a place less suited for us. You left the ease of comforts to start anew. You left to grow into your potentials. Now, in this moment of returned friendship, of familial camaraderie, I see reflected in you the value of my own worth, an anti-capitalist voucher. I feel a deep admiration.
I'm going to talk a bit about and read some text and poems about a residency I did in November. It was through this organization, this performance art organization called Mountain Standard Time Performative Art Festival in Calgary, and it was their 10-year anniversary. So for their 10 years, they asked 10 different artists from around the world to do these international exchange residencies, and they found my practice, I guess, interesting enough to send me on this voyage to Thailand, to Asiatopia Foundation, an artist residency based in the small village of Nan in northeast Thailand. And I was there for a month as a performance artist, which I've never really identified as, but because of my practice with music and this sort of thing, and just gallery exhibition type work, they thought it'd be interesting for me to go. So I was there for a month, did some stuff, did some performances, did some performance sound art in the cornfields, played some shows, and then just had some time at the residency and some time in Bangkok as well, where I just wandered, flinnered around like an art tourist. And when I came back, I'm gonna start reading now. When I came back, Mountain Standard Time asked me to reflect on my experience there for their grant and their press purposes. I was asked a page of boilerplate questions about my timeline, objectives, numbers, names. To report back in this manner with the host organization is to frame the process of one's experience of an artist residency in a kind of employer-employee dynamic, which isn't to say that that's necessarily a negative or unreasonable expectation of the artist. Trust and accountability are as important in this type of relationship as any other. And I can happily abide by and play by the funder's rules and make MST's job as easy as possible. But still, it is important to acknowledge how this kind of residency rests on the rhetoric of cultural exchange and how this kind of reporting imposes a certain framework of thinking about the experience in a systematized and clinical way, one that I found does not make much space for self-reflection, critical or otherwise. Isn't it enough that we're just doing what we're all doing as an antithesis to other forms of culture, like mass culture, like mainstream culture, toxic culture, ruling class oppression of culture, and the capitalist distribution and siphoning of culture? Maybe that should be enough, but it didn't feel so at the time. Still doesn't really feel so now, I guess. But then my therapist reassures me that it is enough just last week. And having decolonial practices become more and more ingrained in my everyday life over the years, it's something that I'm working through on a more personal level as well, like decolonizing desire and my expectations, my reactions, my patterns, and my habits, ways of being that I've picked up through a Western-centric education since immigrating here when I was 4. That small formative part of me has always been questioning the status quo from some distance away and wondering what about it draws me in and repulses me at the same time. Wondering where I'll land and am landing at any given day of my life. I like to think that what we're all doing here tonight is a form of working through that in some ways, doing what we can to create and hold space for each other beyond the normative or urbanity that marks our everyday. So after that report I did for MST of the stat type questions, I included some other thoughts that didn't fit anywhere, but that was important for me to get down before I forgot. And I'm going to read from that now. And Britt, can you press play on my vacation slideshow? Okay. Working with Champon and staying with him in Noi over the month was an intensely familial experience. A few times people asked if I was their daughter. They do have a daughter who lives in Bangkok. She is 40 and a violinist and doesn't have much patience for her father's performance artist antics. It's an interesting identity to just fall into. And because we're all Asian, I think it's easier for me to fall into that daughter role than if I was clearly unrelated to them. I've never really had that experience with art elders, being thrown into a daily routine for almost a month, going to the market, preparing meals, 8-hour car rides, all reminding me of the road trip I took with my own parents when I was a preteen over to Lake Louise and back. Reminded me of that little me in the photos, in my flower pants, a wispy ponytail and a scrunchie, bored, forming memories, feeling the cold mountain air in the heat of the summer sun. Thailand brought up those memories and some of the corresponding behavior that I never thought I would access again. In some ways, comfortable and comforting, and in other ways, awkward and unwelcome. All of it a bit strange, but doing this in a way made me feel closer to my parents since I've been back. A lot of thoughts and feelings could be better explained or communicated through poetry, I think, in a way where thoughts and feelings can sit relational to each other without as much hierarchy and order. I feel pretty messy about that time. It was only 2 months ago. There were so many waves of different and at times conflicting emotions that aren't really worth justifying through sentences. But I also don't want to deny those complexities that definitely exist. Traveling is never comfortable, but it is always illuminating. Poem 1. Mosquitoes on the water, butterflied on the pavement. We dance, we've never danced. Betamin knockoffs, off-white, sink into syrup, form little bananas. Fuchsia, fusion, fused, effused, just generally used. I add up my bites, mapped all over my body into my hand, from sitting politely under somebody else's direction. In this moment, all I want is coverage, thick enough conviction, enough for a blouse, structured like the army procession, so I may blend into, blow kisses to, the people. At the request of their majesty, I stop playing my song. How many times can you play that song wrong? Because it wasn't meant to be. They say real love is a banana, sweet with a golden hue. That's something a monkey said to my favorite David, and it stopped me in its sensation. Everything before and after circles to create that donut hole. Time stops its arrowing, misses the mark, avoids the point. And there it were, somewhere too, the mountain yams of the mountain people, flank the wrong side of the wind going down. There is no reception between here and Laos. Lookouts look out to certain death. Ancient dirt, there is no other kind, enters at the heart. Even without a target, this cannot be denied. What would you call that? Yet another maiden flung off a cliff, deified into legend, not a religion. So many goddesses merge into one. Bye-bye to mere mortal life, not good enough, plunged upwards, in the air trailing silk, scarves, sleeves, tresses, shopping for the perfect island. We're now dancing for freedom over safety, snakes over pheasant. The hippie life as I am seen sipping on fuchsia, banana syrup, watching the king and all the others feasting on everything else from just beyond the barricade. Poem 2. May this serve justice tonight, towards the imperative, gotta love something. Aren't you a person? Are you an only person? Or are you people? Can you scrape your way through flesh, know them from offside solitary actions, or fail? Zero grace, all gravity, dragged and purged through the gravel, the relational space occupied by the bloodying clash of material. Blood is not an abstraction, and life is not always precious. You said that too fast. You still don't get me. I didn't say that. You misunderstood. Why won't you trust me? What if? Between bodies and words is somewhere pockets are meant to be kept closed. Every place is so habitable, and people so resilient, and suffering, and landscape so hypnotic. There's always more to be. I don't remember the meaning, but the tone of that emotional landscape sticks with me like rice to the inside of bamboo. Some days I wish for the plunger to return, and the blade, to be bled, wet, and blue, as the butterfly pea jellies, as the custard congeals, as the waistband cinches around my only persons. Last one. Poem 3. My phone is an unsorted room. A ramshackle roof-bubbled fixer-upper. Fire out, water damaged. Business pulses through the cracks. Representations smell like melting permafrost, I heard from a podcast just last night. This body is a document, errors itself while trying to delete, reloading constantly into the present. Being present means not thinking about the application, freezes and wiggles from behind the glass. It's cracked and fidgeting, immersed in its reflection, fans out a glimmering blade, reframing all the time what miracle it is to be alive. Months and years of pics lay in this dump I bought. Phantoms hoarding fantasies, a collector's garage, holds in duration, rhythmic and beating, if you know how to archive. Tag the shadows, they're it. The wounds stay open, but are kept kindly at a distance, while writing poems about something else.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.